premarital relationship counseling. Now, I specifically made it that sort of title instead of just premarital counseling, because there's a lot of pre-marriage counseling around that has to do with looking at the wedding date and who should you invite to a wedding and what are some of the etiquette for having a wedding, and I didn't want to really do that. I wanted to specifically talk about relationships, so that's what we're going to do tonight. Introduction. There are few areas of preventative counseling as important as pre-marriage. The society we live in doesn't honor relationship as much as rationalism, money, or sex. Therefore, every engaged couple ought to have some basic pre-marriage relationship counseling, not just discuss wedding plans and sexual functioning. Not that there's anything wrong with that. In fact, it would help to do a pre-marriage survey like Prepare before even getting engaged. Then the couple would have some idea of the challenges in front of them in becoming one flesh. Now, I might show you that survey. I forgot to bring it with me, but in the break I'll go grab a copy so you can have a look at it. Interesting sideline. Every Baptist minister now that's being ordained in Victoria has to be qualified to do this, Prepare. So the Baptist Union sees it as so important that they won't ordain pastors without them being able to run the Prepare course. B, Jesus. You're feeling there as Jesus? Jesus is interested in marriages. It's probably no coincidence that Jesus performed his first miracle at a wedding feast. I'm sure he, as the God of love, was very interested in the human condition and our rituals of birth, weddings, and funerals. It is only appropriate that Jesus turned water into wine as his first demonstration of power, just as being one flesh, marriage, is the first mention of a relationship between human beings. Is God interested in relationship? We looked at that last time. Why do you think that God's interested in relationship? Well, the two great commandments are all about that, aren't they? Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. That whole package of love is about relationship. Going on, C, why get married? Why get married? God established marriage in the Garden of Eden as the union of one man and one woman for life. He wants marriage to be held in honor. God has designed it for the happiness of the human race, as a channel for love to be expressed in an intimate manner, and for reproduction. The only type of marriage forbidden in the Bible is marriage between a believer and an unbeliever. Now, that is from the Study Bible, so I just quoted that little passage because I thought it was really good. God, our Creator, has said that marriage is a good thing. And the reference there is God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it." Genesis 1:28. There's a trend in society to live together in de facto relationships. Unfortunately, couples who do this are breaking God's commandment to have a commitment to each other and a commitment to the sanctity of the institution of marriage. Not surprisingly, statistics tell us that couples living together are less likely to succeed in a permanent relationship than people who marry with some sort of commitment and ceremony. Just before you go on, rationally, logically, shouldn't it be better to try out marriage before you plunge? Sure. But it doesn't work. I had a lady today talking about a relationship with her husband, and it wasn't working, and she was saying, I presented her what I believed was some things she should do, which was basically a type of submission, and she said, "Gee, that's really old-fashioned." And I said, "Yeah, isn't it? Really quaint." And she said, "Gee, I'll never be able to tell my girlfriends this." And I said, "Oh, what are your girlfriends like?" And she said, "Oh, well, they're all complaining about their husbands. Their marriages aren't working." And I said, "So it's not working for them either, the world's way." And she had to admit, no. What about society in general? Is it working the world's way? No. What about the world? The world scene, is it working? No. So, she was pretty open, and I just said, look around you. If the way you're doing it works, well, go with it. If it doesn't work, well, you better change. And at the end of the session, she was willing to have a go because she was open. She could see that, hey, her girlfriends were in the same boat as her. So what's the use of going and talking to them? They don't have any solutions. Now, there are people out there, maybe not many, but there are some people out there, that want some answers. And the good news is you people have some of those answers. Go and give it to somebody. You don't have to talk religious thing. Just present to them the facts of what's happening. She could see, this lady, after I explained it to her, she could see that she was robbing her husband of dignity because she was the nag. She was coming over as having all the answers, and he was stupid, and he didn't know what he was doing, which is true, by the way. I mean, she's got it right, the fact that he doesn't know what he's doing. But beating this guy into the ground with a big stick is not helping their relationship. Now, the point I'm trying to make here, without getting too far off track, is this: if the world's way would work and God's way didn't work, well, let's go do the world's way. Let's be practical here. But the truth is, the world's way doesn't work. And in de facto relationships, the strange thing is, you'd think that marriages that were on a trial basis, when they finally, had some sort of commitment, that those relationships would work better. They don't. They don't. There's something supernatural about making a commitment to another person and honoring the institution of marriage. Let's go on, page 2. D, towards a successful marriage. Towards a successful marriage. In today's society, people are encouraged to marry whomever they like. This lacks wisdom, as not any two people have the skills or the desire for commitment or the talents to make a marriage succeed. Some vital aspects of a successful marriage relationship are as follows, which we're going to look at now. And some of these we've covered in more detail in other parts of the course. Number 1, being unified in spirituality. Being unified. Having a similar spiritual outlook is necessary to good marriage, as our essential motivations come out of our spirit and our hearts. Where there is unity, God commands the blessing. And 2 Corinthians says, what harmony is there between Christ and Belial? What does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? Spiritual unity is the foundation of any marriage, and many churches refuse to marry people of different faiths because of that. Our spirituality governs our relationship with God and with each other. Now, it's just Luke 10, that's just the 2 great commandments again. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Anybody have any questions so far? I'll see I'm pretty quiet tonight. Number 2, practicing emotional sensitivity. Practicing emotional sensitivity. The way human beings bond to each other is related to how much emotion they share. Often women complain their husband doesn't listen to them, i.e. their feelings. Even kidnappers and their victims start bonding or making friends because of the shared emotion during the ordeal. It's important for individual emotional health to verbalize one's feelings. It is important for the health of the relationship to share them with the partner. People who have trouble expressing their emotions need to learn new skills and work through any issues that prevent them from doing so. Number 3, dealing with family of origin issues. Shortcut there, FOO, family of origin. Dealing with family of origin issues. We often get our worldview from our family of origin. How we treat emotions, our expectations of life, our concept of love, all come from our original family. Unfortunately, the family system, from God's point of view, is often dysfunctional when it comes to relationships. Most people have to work through issues of forgiveness as well as generational curses to be free from family bondages. Now, these are all aspects of working towards a successful marriage. Number 4, knowing male and female differences. Knowing male and female differences. And I think instead of knowing, maybe a better one would be understanding. Because it's not just good enough to know it, you have to practice it. And I think understanding is probably a better word there. It's quite amazing how many fights by couples are started by their ignorance of the psychology of the opposite sex. It's a scientific fact that male and female brains are structurally different. This means the way males and females think and behave is partly determined by their gender. Every person needs to study the other sex and find out what's important to them. All of us need to read books about the gender we're married to or relate to. One such book is Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus by Gray. Setting the person free to be who God designed them to be is a big challenge, but necessary to the health of a relationship. You know, this book by Gray, it's not perfect. In fact, one lady came and complained because we had it up in the bookshop, and she said, well, it's not a Christian book, turf it out. But a couple things. One, first of all, apparently Dr. Gray is a Christian. Some people have heard him on TV, and apparently he preaches Jesus quite forcefully. But secondly, you know, what he's describing is the human condition, you know, and relatively accurately for most of us. I mean, there's, of course, huge variety of males and females, but I think he takes the sort of center road, the masses of people, of course. And we can pick the book to bits and say, well, but I think he sets it out in a fairly reasonable manner. Number 5, applying relationship fundamentals. Applying relationship fundamentals. There are basic principles of relationship that every couple need to know. A few examples of this are forgiveness, accepting each other's feelings and our own as valid for them, not controlling by releasing them to the choice of their will, and apologizing when wrong and being accountable for my actions. Now, you know, as I'm going through this list, these are just important points that I cover when I do pre-marriage counseling, okay? So it's not, you know, in an hour session, this is not, encompassing, exhaustive. This is not an exhaustive paper, right? This is just touching a few highlights here. And, you know, relationship fundamentals, you could talk about that for a whole session, easy. So because we've covered that elsewhere, I'm not going to go into it in a great deal. Just probably one thing here that a lot of us struggle with, and that is accepting our own feelings as valid for myself. And then being able to share it with my partner or my friend or whatever, my parents. Really important. You know, in the culture we live in, we get this underlying worldview that emotions are not important. And they're incredibly important. And in Christian circles, we're probably even worse than the world in suppressing our feelings. So I see that as a very big area to help people through in pre-marriage counseling. Number 6, practicing good communication skills. Practicing good communication skills. Perhaps the most important skill in developing a good marriage is the art of good communication. It's especially important for couples from different backgrounds of culture, birth order, female dominance, addictions, religion, different values, and economic background. Let's just stop there for a minute and go through some of those areas a little. What kind of problems would you get if you had two people from different cultures? Radical different, you know? An Iranian married to an Aucker Australian. Could that cause some conflict? Well, you've got two different people with two different goalposts, and there's two different traditions coming out of their two different cultures, so which tradition do you uphold? Well, I mean, that's the thing that the couple have to work out, isn't it? And how are you going to work that out? Good communication skills, aren't you? You know, I had one couple came in to see me. I think he was a Buddhist or Hindu from India, and she was a Christian from, I forget where it was, let's say New Zealand. You know? And I think he was black and she was white, actually, I think, from India. Is there going to be any conflict there? Absolutely, just a tad. In the old days, and I think I mentioned this before, there was some wisdom in us marrying within our own village, because at least we didn't have to have good communication skills there. But what happens if we're marrying people from right around the other side of the globe? The differences are so huge. If I don't have good communication skills, we're going to struggle. Now, I'm not saying that marrying somebody radically different is automatically bad. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying now is that it's more difficult, and it's going to take more energy to work out. Now, what if the culture is different and the birth order is different? You might say, what do we mean by birth order? Birth order is I'm number 2 in my family. So I've got an older brother, 8 years older than me. I'm number 2. Then I've got a sister. Then I've got a brother. Then I've got another sister. So there's 5 kids. Now we know, and there's a book called the Birth Order Book that I'd encourage you to read, those of you that are doing counseling especially, because we know that there's quite a distinctive personality type in being the oldest or the single child. Very distinctive. And also the youngest in the family tends to have some certain characteristics. And then the ones in the middle, they're sort of all mixed up depending on other circumstances. Like I'm number 2, but my older brother's 8 years older than me. So in effect, that means that I was an oldest child too. When he went off to uni, I was the eldest one at home, and my sister and I had some good fights over who had the authority around the place. Because I've been gone to Germany for 4 years. She had become the oldest, you see. So each of us became the oldest in turn, quite radically. Older brother, then me, then I'm gone for 4 years, I come back. In the meantime, Sister Ellen, she's taken over the little hutch of the other 3. I come back, power struggle, who's this guy? Where's he been for the last 4 years, So we had some rip-roaring fights, her and I. But interesting, and this is one of the points I'm making about emotions, out of all the kids, who do you think I'm closest to? The same sister that I used to have all the fights with. Why? Because emotions expressed bond people together. Birth order, female dominance. This is one of the things I was talking to this lady about. She said, well, the guy gets it wrong all the time. Someone's got to, keep him on the right track. That's how the world thinks, isn't it? I mean, that's the cry of feminism. The men have stuffed up the world, so ladies rise and unite. We'll do a better job. Do you think you really would? Let's put it this way, from a biblical perspective, do you think you really would? No. Why not? Because your heart's as deceitfully wicked as mine. This is not about male or female stuffing the world up. It's about human beings stuffing the world up. And until the heart's changed, are we going to have stuff like what's happening in East Timor? Sure, of course we are. That's human reality. Because we've got these hearts that are into pride or success or competition or, a lot of insecurity over in Indonesia. Of course, addictions. If the 2 people have addictions, and you'll seldom find a couple where just one person has an addiction. Almost invariably, if the male's got an addiction, the female will have some. And that's why we've got Al-Anon for the spouse of the alcoholic. We've got AA for the alcoholic. We've got Al-Anon for the spouse of the alcoholic. Why? Because that person belonging to Al-Anon, they've got addiction problems too. Often it's relationship addictions. Okay, different values, of course. Economic background. I've got one couple where she's from a fairly middle-class background. He's from his dad was one of the shakers and movers in Melbourne. And does that cause some conflicts? Absolutely. He says to her something like, she just buys for argument's sake, let's say a $200 blouse. And he says, what brand is it? And she tells him, and he kind of wrinkles his nose like, well, that's not good enough. And it was really funny. Yeah, I know, we can all laugh at this, but real problem for this couple. So anyways, one day she was in Lorne, after he'd been sort of downing on her, oh, that's not trendy enough or something. And in Lorne, here was the articles of clothing that she'd bought in a shop in Lorne. And then he said, oh, that's fine then. You know, that made it okay, because obviously if it was in the shop, then it must be trendy enough. Conflict. We can laugh at it, but different culture, isn't it? Okay, some of the skills we might need in good communication. Reflective listening, which is feeding back to the person what I think I've heard. Assertiveness, which is sharing my feelings and then telling that person what my needs might be, but releasing them to the choice of their will. Sharing feelings, we've talked about, conflict resolution, and fighting fair. I'm always amused by newspapers that say, so-and-so has been married for 50 years. They interview him, and the interviewer says, well, what's the secret of your success? And most likely the male says, oh, we never had any fights. Well, why not? Because he was at the pub every night. How can you have fights when you're never home? That wasn't a relationship. That was two single people in a married condition. Yeah, you can get away living in the same household with somebody if you're on your different track. But if you want intimacy, biblical one flesh, there's going to be some adjustments. And the Lord gave me a picture for one couple, at one stage, and that was that the lady was a Ferrari and the guy was a Bedford truck, and the Lord was trying to make them into one vehicle. There's going to be a bit of sheet metal work going on here, Okay, number 7, having similar values and goals. Having similar values and goals. A simple illustration of the necessity of having the same values is the idea of goalposts. The closer the goalposts of a couple are, the less work they'll have to do to overcome the differences and arrive at unity. So, if we just looked at goalposts, like my two fingers here are goalposts, obviously, if my goalposts are that far apart, what sort of negotiation are we going to have? Well, we can either have two single people in a married condition, everybody doing their own thing, but if I want one flesh, I'm going to have one goalpost. So we're going to have to adjust these goalposts through discussion and negotiation, so those goalposts come together. Now, the thing about marriage counseling is this: if I don't have a standard that I can give the couple, who's the one that has to shift? It all has to be negotiated. We got these two goalposts. Should this person shift their goalpost there, or should this one shift it there, or should they both shift halfway, or, who's right and who's wrong? You spend endless hours with non-Christian couples trying to be very subjective, because you can't tell them as a counselor where their goalpost should be. See? So the first thing I need to know in marriage counseling is what? Do they have Christian values? And do they want me to share Christian values with them? Because if they do, I've just cut out a whole bunch of work. Because then I can just say, well, here's the Bible. This is what the Bible says. You can argue with me about the Bible. That's great. Please do that. But if you accept what the Bible says is the goalpost, are you both willing to give up your self-life and do what the Bible tells you should do? Well, that really simplifies things. If they're willing to do that, that's great. Okay, we want unity, if we can, first. And last time we had that Appendix B, relationship decision-making. The very first thing I want to do is always communicate effectively with my partner. The second thing I want to do is to come to unity if possible. I would think it's fair to say that Susan and I, when we're making decisions these days, probably have about 95% unity. Because We pray about it, we work it through, we investigate our hearts, and 95% of the time I reckon we have unity. Now, by the way, I think every male needs to reserve the right once or twice a year to be the captain of the ship and saying, well, this is what we're going to do, whether we have unity or not. I think God requires that of men, of husbands. That is, I'm to meet my wife's needs, but I'm not necessary to meet her wants. And where most men mess it up is they're so busy trying to please their wife for her wants, guess what happens? Her needs never get met. See, because the wife is going to have the tension between her flesh and her spirit. The flesh wants, okay, I'm being a bit silly here, but the flesh wants, say, a new dress, but the need is to have some hugs from the guy. Right? Well, guys, they're, because they don't see as clearly as the women do often, what are they going to do? Well, it's very simple to supply the money to buy a new dress. Here, honey, here's $200, go and buy a new dress. Well, he's working his guts out, and she never gets to see him. Well, how long is that marriage going to last? She might have her closet full of new dresses. Well, that's right. Yeah. I mean, the tragic thing is that's exactly what happened to my older brother. He worked his guts out to have a 1,000-acre tree farm, and now he just got divorced last year. Who's he going to... The whole idea was the tree farm was the retirement money so that they could go on cruises around the world. What a tragedy. He worked his guts out. He worked her guts out. She decided, I'm out of here. This guy's, a tyrant. Now they both have this money and nobody to really spend it with. How sad. How sad. Okay, moving on, 7. Second paragraph there. All of us change values as we grow and mature, so they're not fixed. I think that's important to understand. One of the reasons probably Susan and I have a lot of unity is because I was just thinking about this the other day. Our values have changed so much since we were first married. I was a student radical. Susan was fairly independent herself. We believed in open marriage, all that rubbish from the 60s and 70s. We tried doing some of that stuff in the beginning of our marriage. Thankfully, we didn't get too far. After a while it just got, just a theory, and we didn't actually go out and practice it like this was the latest thing. So we didn't stuff things up too much. Plenty of other people did. They really believed that open marriage was the way to go. Old-style marriage wasn't working, so let's have find another couple and do swappies. Is that going to work? How can it? The human nature is still the same. If a male and a female are having trouble because of male-female misunderstandings, what's going to happen if I hop in bed with another babe? I'm right back at square one. What's the point? And that's why God says, look, commit yourself and change. Commit yourself and change. Adapt.
You wouldn't be able to see your values changing as they change.
No. I'm radically different, but, it's taken 30 years to be radically different. Okay. Because not everybody will have exactly the same values, they need to be openly discussed. Thus the value of a survey like Prepare, because the good thing about Prepare is it allows us to see what our attitudes are today, not necessarily what they'll be next week. All these surveys or psych tests, they all have limited shelf life. 6 to 10 weeks, and they're already out of date. Number 8, intimacy of touch and feeling. Intimacy of touch and feeling. All of us need touch. We're designed to need physical affection. We know from experiments that people or animals that don't get touch will be psychologically disturbed. Frequent physical touch is the backbone of successful marriages or relationships in general. Yes.
With that test on prepare that you rather do before they ever get engaged,
Yes.
and it only has to basically show up over 10 weeks, they're not going to get married for, say, 12 months after they get engaged, that would not be relevant for when they get married then, would it?
But the thing's never that accurate, Phil. You're looking in ballpark figures. You're looking at broad generalizations. You know, like what the survey might expose is that they've never talked about religion, sex, and politics were the three things a lady should not talk about. Sexuality with my future spouse. Well, that's really taking a risk. You know, so the thing that the preparer would do is just expose the fact that we haven't discussed these areas. You know, it would expose that. Not that it's not the sort of thing that you can say, well, number 3 answer, you answer to 5 this time, and 3 months from now you answer to 4, and therefore it's invalid. You know, yeah. It gives us pictures of, in general, what is going on, and so in that sense, the thing's valid for further on, but in specific points in 10 weeks, it's not. Just getting back to the frequent physical touch is the backbone of successful marriages. I think probably frequent physical touch is the backbone of lots of relationships. Friendships. I mean, the 5 of us kids, we taught my dad how to touch, how to hug. My parents didn't teach us. We taught them. Not real healthy. I mean, not real healthy how they didn't touch us much. So parents and children need to touch. Friends need to touch. I mean, in other cultures, both the boys and the girls hold hands as they're walking down the street. You see a couple of men holding hands in other cultures, you think, oh, well, but now they're just friends touching. And we've sanitized, sterilized the culture we have here, where we've eliminated touch. Very dangerous. One of the experiments they did is they took monkeys, and the newborn baby monkey, and then they gave it substitute parents. And to keep it all the same, they gave it, instead of a real monkey mother, they gave them, like a wireframe skeleton. And then they put, some padding on it. And then they put some, like electric heater in it. And with each experimental animal, they did this artificial mother differently. And guess what they found out? The more cuddly the ersatz fake mother was, the more touch that the monkey could do, the better adjusted the monkey was. Classic. It's one of those classic psychology experiments. Touch, very important. Why would a woman who's getting smashed up by her husband, sent to hospital every 3rd or 4th week, why would a lady like that stay with a guy like that? Better the devil you know than not having one. Better having an abusive mate than not having any mate. Better being touched occasionally, even in the wrong way, than not being touched at all. Yes? That's it. Very sad. It's not just with young marrieds. It's a huge problem, and it's a problem with society. I mean, because of the news of more pedophiles around, and I'm not sure that there's any more than there ever was, but certainly we all know about it now. I mean, everybody's suspect. You know, the uncle that bounces his niece on his knee, or the teacher that gives a kid a hug. And, you know, we're sexualizing touch. And because of that, I mean, what's going to happen is we're all going to have less touch, the whole society. You know, well, I think we're going to produce more psychologically disturbed people than we got already. Guaranteed. Counseling's a growing business, people. You're not going to run out. The world around us is not getting better. It is not. You know, there's going to be more and more demands for counselors because, you know, the world's really getting warped out there. And human beings are designed a certain way, and we're not built to cope with the abuse, self-imposed or otherwise, that we're going to have. You know, I have the analogy of getting electric heater, plugging it in the wall that happens to have a 1,000-volt socket. So the electric heater blows up. You take it back to the manufacturer. You say, hey, this thing doesn't work. Something wrong. So they fix it up. You bring it home. You stick it in the socket, 1,000 volts. You blow the things to bits. You take it back to the manufacturer. The manufacturer goes, gee, there's something strange going on here. We built it okay. You know, wouldn't you think there's something wrong? You know, but that's what as society we're doing. Here as human beings, God the Maker has designed it a certain way. He's designed it for 240 volts, and we're plugging it into a 1,000-volt power supply. You know, is it going to go crook? Absolutely. Should we be blaming the manufacturer? No way. You know, we're the ones that are doing the abuse. You know, it wasn't God's fault that we're abusing the way we've been built. That's our problem. That's not His problem. That's our problem.
You also look at false accusations that stick and ruin a person's life.
Well, we do. We do. I don't know that I've got a solution to this problem because it's really huge. But it is real, and it's going to get worse. You know, partly because there maybe will be more pedophiles around with the decline in our values. But just getting back to the male-female thing about women wanting hugs without sex, you know, I think that's one of the basic things that men have to learn. You know, that they need to touch, and more touch, and that the touch should not always lead to sex. And any husband that's got any sense will learn that lesson early on in the piece, so that some of that confusion doesn't happen. And then, of course, how do we communicate whether sex is meant to be happening or not? You know, in Victorian days, they put the handkerchief on the dresser, you know, and if the handkerchief was out, somebody was saying, was this class was talking about the jelly beans? No, it must have been the other class. We talked about it in the other class, and one of the people quipped that one of their friends, they do it with jelly beans. They put a jelly bean on the pillow. And if both of the two people have a jelly bean on the pillow, that means it's on that night. You know? Well, you know, those of you that are in that sort of physical relationship, it isn't easy to communicate, is it? Without giving the wrong impression. So it's one of those areas where it sometimes can be difficult to communicate. And we all have those signals. You know, whether it's a jelly bean or the word or the look or the whatever it is, those are all the special signals of that couple, aren't they? And that ritual, you have to create those rituals. I think the jelly bean idea is a great little ritual. You know? Might seem a bit simplistic, but apparently it gets the job done. So, let's go on. Number 9. Agape love, or agape love, is sacrificial love. Agape love, sacrificial love. Although romantic and sexual love are nice, they don't make a marriage last. Agape love, or love that acts in the best interest of the other, is the kind of love that makes marriages prosper. In a godly marriage relationship, the individual has to sacrifice themselves in order to prosper the couple or their relationship with God. And I'll just do a little diagram on the board. A lot of people today have the wrong idea of love. They think that love is doing things for people, and it's not. That's the rescuers. rescuer victim mentality, codependency. People in codependency will have the idea that love is doing things for people. So if you ask me to do something and I don't do it, therefore what must happen? I must not love you. Where I might not be wanting to do it because it was harmful to you. Okay. Real love is acting in the other person's best possible interest. And God expects me to sometimes sacrifice in order for that to take place. Okay, well, we'll just do a little diagram, which you can put in your margin there. I didn't leave you in a room. Did we do that last time? Last Tuesday? Must have been the other class too. We've done it before with some of you. Well, let me just explain it. For those of you that have seen it before, it's a review. For those of you that haven't seen it, this is the first time. I believe that there's 4 people involved in a marriage. We have the individual male, we have the individual female, we have the couple, and we have God. Now, in order for love to flow, we have to act in the other person's best interest. Now, has God acted in my best interest? Yes. Did He sacrifice some things in order to bless me? Absolutely. Now, because God first loved me, what's the first great commandment? I'm to love Him back. Does that mean I'm going to have to sacrifice some things? Absolutely. So we have a down arrow there showing of sacrifice, giving up things. You know, John the Baptist said, I must decrease in order that He increase. You know, Dan Fengler must decrease in order that God increase in me. So one, I have to give up some of me in order to have that relationship with God. But I also have to sacrifice some of me as an individual in order to bless what? The couple. We've got an extreme from a couple that is 2 single people in a quasi-married condition, which we call disconnected, to another couple that are so enmeshed in each other, well, that's what you call them, enmeshed, that their individuality has disappeared. Do you think either of those models is what God wants? So what's the balance in there? I have to sacrifice some of the individual Daniel so that God increases and the couple increases. But God's always going to leave me a certain measure of my individuality. Now, I get a lot of ladies who believe that they have given up their individuality. All that tells me is that they've given up too much. And they say, well, doesn't God want me to be submissive in the religious idea where I have to do everything my husband's way? No way. You know, I think Proverbs 31 is a good example of a godly woman. I think it really is. I mean, she's out there doing, she's a land baron, out there doing deals. What's that? Women like that. I think they really exist. Probably not as much since television. I mean, if you stay up until 12 o'clock watching the movie, you're not going to get up before dawn, are you? Okay, let's go on. I think we'll cover this next section before we take a break. E, why do we choose the person we do? Why do we choose the person we do? So talking about from a pre-marriage point of view, why do 2 people become engaged? Why do they think that they're suited to each other? In many cultures, the spouse is chosen by the parents. According to statistics, arranged marriages have a better chance of staying together than romantically chosen ones like we have in the Anglo-Saxon West. This is not to say that arranged marriages are necessarily happier. Why would marriages last more in cultures that have arranged marriages or places like, say, Greece? Greece has got a very low divorce rate compared to Australia. Why? Well, that's right. It's part of the culture. And, of course, because of the Orthodox religion that most Greeks would believe in, it's frowned upon. Same as mainly Catholic countries are going to have a lower divorce rate because the religion says no. Now, we can't necessarily judge whether arranged marriages are better in a sense because we're not looking at a quality of life index, are we? I mean, there could be a lot of arranged marriages that are terribly unhappy but still stay together because of the social pressure. So I'm not trying to make a comment that we need to go to arranged marriages here in Australia, but what I am trying to point out is that we have this arrogance, I guess, in the West about our romantically chosen partners. Somehow that's supposed to be better than arranged. And I'm not convinced that that's necessarily true. What's the critical factor of whether or not a marriage is going to succeed or not? Do they know how to love? Do they know how to love? Do they know how to act in the other person's best interest? Do you know of any, ladies, do you know of any wives that would leave their husband if he knew how to act in her best interest? I don't know of any. That's not going to happen. So, no matter what culture I come from, whether it's from China or India or Australia, if the partner knows how to act in my best interest, I'm going to stick around. See? So I don't think we can judge on how the couple came together. I think we have to judge on whether they know how to love.
What would be the difference then, Daniel, between acting in the spouse's best interest or bound to their wants?
Well, I would put needs in the basket of acting in their best interest. Does my Susan need lots of hugs and touch today? Sure.
I'm not talking materialism, obviously, because you wouldn't know her needs in that area.
Well, how many dresses does she need? Versus how many dresses does she want? You know, if Susan asked me, you know, I want to buy this dress or that dress, depending on how many dresses she... By the way, Susan's the sort of lady, I got to twist her arm to buy anything. So, you know, I'm not going to tell you that, you know, the crummy old joke about wives and their bank cards. I mean, it's a lie, like most generalizations are. But, you know, I think there's a quality difference between how much hugging and touch and affection Susan gets and whether or not she's, you know, got 19 dresses or 20. And I think that's where the males really need to understand females, because we're a bit too glib about it. You know, I have a big dust-up with Susan, and I go to Jeff or some other male, and I say, Jeff, you know, how do you handle it? Well, just give her a bunch of flowers. She'll be right. Jeff wouldn't do that, by the way, but anymore. You know, but that's how thick we are, you know. I mean, what makes me think some other guy who's got relationship problems is going to know about females any better than I do? That's the blind leading the blind. But that's what men do. You know? Rather than going to the female and saying, look, honey, what's really important to you? Is it really the dress important to you, or the hugs important to you? What's important?
Now you're going back to communication.
Well, that's right. Absolutely. You bet. Okay, let's go on. Paragraph 2, under E. For those of us in the West, why do we choose the particular person we do marry? Besides chemistry and sex, there's a very spiritual reason. And this is my testimony. Let me illustrate with my own choice of a mate. Susan and I met at a university where there are 20,000 students. So have we talked about this one? In this class? Okay. This means there were approximately 10,000 single people, of which, say, 5,000 were of the opposite sex. Why did we select each other out of such a large pool of candidates? Okay, let's just stop, and I'm going to draw 5 lines like in the boxes there, and you can fill in there in just a minute. Okay. Now, so I've got 5,000 females to select from. Now, I didn't, over my 5 years at uni, I didn't actually meet 5,000, but I reckon I probably did meet 3,000. That is, I sat next to Mary on the bus, although I didn't know that was Mary. You know, Joanne at the lectures and Emily at the calf. Now, why didn't I marry Emily or Mary or Joanne? Well, I never talked to Mary. She was sitting right next to me. I could have chatted her up. Never, maybe I got to know Joanne's name, but never bothered to pursue the phone number. Why not? I believe it has to do with my biases. It has nothing to do with Mary or Joanne. They were fine ladies. It had to do with my prejudices, my biases, my filters, my blinkers. That is, Mary was too tall or too short, or too fat or too thin, or too smart or too dumb, or too black or too white. Prejudice. Do you think that Jesus could have married any lady and made her happy? I would think so. So it wasn't the particular woman that Jesus had to marry that would have made it successful. Agreed? Fate? No, don't think so. I was pretty cynical. I was a non-Christian at the time. Susan was backslidden. We made up she tried to make up godly vows. We made up our vows together. I never signed it. That was accidental. I mean, I kind of wanted to sign it, but maybe it was unconscious that I never did. But I couldn't conceive, just like the will couldn't. How can I be married to this person for a lifetime? How is that possible? Yeah. Well, without God, it isn't possible, generally speaking. Yeah. So, anyways, getting back to the shelves here. I believe that there was thousands of women that I could have married. But I selected a bunch of them out. I threw them away because of my biases, okay? So let's just illustrate that in like this. Too tall, too short, too fat, too thin, too smart, too dumb, too blonde, too brunette. Because in a sense, that's how ridiculous it is. Okay? So, we have these females here, and I believe there's more than one. Susan was not, in a sense, the only lady that I could have ever married. There's a whole bunch on the same shelf. But I did eliminate a whole lot of others that were on different shelves. And I'll show you in a minute why. So every woman on that shelf is basically the same. Now, if I hadn't met Susan, I would have met number 2, because I would have met her at the party in the other town that I never went to because I was married by then. See? Well, and she might have said no, but if she said no, it's probably because she was on another shelf. And actually, one lady I was very seriously involved in said no, and that was because she was on a different shelf. I didn't match her expectations. So this other woman. So the other woman married somebody on the same shelf as her. I didn't fit. Now, Susan's doing the same thing, of course. She's got these 3,000 guys to choose from. it sounds strange because most of us, when we're single, we're going, oh man, woe is me. There's nobody around that's just like that would suit me, and I'm so lonely and it's terrible. And I was that too. I mean, I'm not saying anything wrong with it. That's the reality of single life. Getting frustrated. I remember being so frustrated that because it seemed like every woman I met, it's going to sound strange because most guys aren't as mature as women, but they all seemed like petty little girls to me, my own age group. It's probably what you ladies thought about the guys, which is fair enough. So I tried everything. I tried going out to every party I could possibly get to. Well, that didn't work. I thought, well, maybe what you're supposed to do is stay home, and this is some of this fate stuff. They're supposed to just walk to the door. They're the Telstra woman or whatever. And well, I tried that. That didn't work. Finally, I threw in the towel and I said, well, screw this, excuse the expression. That would have been fair enough for me back then. I'm just going to focus on getting on with life. I'm going to live an existential lifestyle where today counts, and what I do today is important. And so I'm going to find out who Daniel is and find out where he's going, and I'm going to do it. And if I don't get married, well, too bad. About 3 weeks later, I met Susan. Now, I don't think that was coincidence. I think that's exactly right. I think God, see, when I'm in pain, I only have two options. And I know there's some single people in this room, so I don't want to say it has to do with your lack of faith or anything like that. Don't misunderstand me. I don't have all the answers. But I do know this. When I'm in pain, I've got two options. And that is I change circumstance or I change my attitudes. I was incapable of changing my circumstance, beyond my control. But what I could do is change my attitudes. And I reckon God left me single until I changed my attitude. So I don't see that as a coincidence. I do see it as a divine thing. But it didn't have to be Susan, though. It could have been someone different. So let's go up here. And, of course, the same thing happens to Susan here. The guys see me, too tall, too short, too fat, too thin, too smart, too dumb. I'm not the only one that's prejudiced here. And here's all the Daniel type. Actually, she had a boyfriend when I met her. Why didn't she marry him? Different shelf. He never was in the competition. She knew that. And within a couple of weeks, she already knew that this guy was out. Then it only took her 9 months to sever the relationship because she had such a soft heart towards the guy. I mean, she liked him. She didn't want to hurt him. Imagine the misery the poor guy went through for 9 months. But that's where assertiveness is really an important communication skill. So Susan was, I'd see Susan on a Friday night. She'd see her the boyfriend on a Saturday night every week. Every week I'd see Susan in tears, caught between two worlds. But she knew fairly on in the piece that he was on a different shelf. It wasn't going to happen. Okay, now what did we have in common that made us on the same shelf? Well, let's just read through the bit and I'll show you what they were. Just your next paragraph here. Yes, God did have a hand in our selection, but I don't believe there's only one person on the whole planet I could have been happy with. Rather, there are a number of somewhat similar people I could marry. I believe the choice we make has to do with our biases, filters, and prejudices. And as I say, I reckon I encountered at least 2,000 single females over my 5 years at uni. Some I sat next to on the bus, in the CAF lectures, etc. Others I met at parties through friends at the disco. Why didn't I chat up Mary, who was sitting next to me at the psych lectures? I was prejudiced against her due to the programming of my heart, and an illustration of shells will help. You see, the spiritual forces over me were very similar to Susan. We were both in rebellion against God. Both of us had lust problems. We both had pride, perfectionism, an independent spirit. On a soul level, we had similar values. We were interested in German things. We were both goal-orientated. Same spiritual forces, both in rebellion against God. Me in my way, she in hers. Both had lust problems. Both had an independent spirit. Susan walked into the disco by herself, and I went, wow, what guts. Independent spirit is what I should have said. Same as me. We connected. Okay, let's go on. Page 5. This blindness is a scary flaw that arranged marriages try to overcome. Unfortunately, our parents have their own prejudices and blind spots, so we don't gain much by having them. Okay, unfortunately, our parents have their own prejudices and blind spots. Our blinkers effectively eliminate the alternative choices. This is why many love-addicted women will marry one alcoholic male after another. This particular problem is what premarriage counseling tries to overcome by exposing us to an outside, relatively objective viewpoint that educates us in life skills. And that's why I'd love for someone to take the prepare thing before they get engaged. What good is it taking the prepare survey once you're engaged? I mean, I've had couples, and they go, oh dear, we've got a few things to sort out. And you can just see the wheel spinning. Gee, how can I get out of this now? Well, how do you get out of it? Well, after you've sent all the wedding invitations. After you bought the wedding dress. How do you stop it? Great difficulty. Seriously, great difficulty.
You had anyone breaking up by that report?
Some have really considered it, but I think some would if they hadn't been so far gone in their preparations.
Their attitude towards each other within how long did they go for half an hour test? I mean, they come in love. How can they walk out confused, not in love?
Phil, love ain't enough. Love ain't enough. You loved your wife when you first got married? No comment. Okay. Well, a lot of people do. It doesn't matter. I mean, a romantic love isn't enough. Agape love is what we need. And if I look at the survey and I say out of 12 categories, 10 of them were on totally opposite ends, I'm just looking, I'm realistically looking at all the work that's involved.
So if they got together to start with, don't you think they'd be prepared to work on the differences that you might highlight?
No.
They would. Well,
There's a stack of people out there that don't. I mean, hey, look, the most difficult marriages I've ever come across is the ones that the church has put together. That, well, one couple, the pastor saw them holding hands and he said, "You better get married." They weren't even friends. Seriously. Christian church here in Melbourne. Quite respected place. I won't tell you where it was. An absolute disaster. They weren't even friends. They hadn't even talked about stuff. Yeah, terrible. Okay, well, let's just stop there and grab a cuppa. Okay, well, before we go on, just want to finish off E, and then I'll talk a little bit about the Prepare and Enrich survey. Getting back to the shelf idea, I believe that my biases, my partner's biases, God and Satan all want us to get married. I don't see that God wants me to get married and Satan doesn't. I think that God and Satan are unified in wanting me to get married to the person I do. Sounds strange, doesn't it? But this is why. You see, I believe that my attitudes are going to dictate whether I have a marriage made in heaven or in hell. It's not the people, it's the attitudes that are going to make it happen. So Satan wants me to marry Susan so that I blame shift her and I point the finger at her arrogance, her independent spirit, her spirit of lust, her rebellion against God, And so I try to smash the mirror. Susan, my partner, is the mirror that will show up all those things in me. So the idea is this: God wants me to marry Susan so she can become the mirror so that I repent for my attitudes. Satan wants me to marry Susan so that I get angry at what I see in her and I try to smash the mirror. See? So, in that sense, Satan and God both want me to marry Susan, as well as my own biases and filters. You follow that? Any questions on that? Crystal. Okay, well, opposites do attract, but you find out that spiritually, often the opposites are the same. Remember the principle of fighting it and doing it? That is, my father could be an alcoholic, I'm a teetotaler, my son's an alcoholic. Is teetotalerism and alcoholism opposites? On the surface they are, but spiritually, they're the same. They're controlled by alcohol. A teetotaler is someone who's being controlled by alcohol. The alcoholic is being controlled by alcohol, but so is the teetotaler. I mean, rabid anti-abortionists are being controlled by what? Abortion. They so hate murder, they go out and they kill abortion workers. Murder them. They so hate murder, they murder. So some of the opposites attracting are in fact the same spiritual forces. Now other things are genuinely complementary. You know, I think most marriages are going to be something like an intuitive person marrying an intellectual. And I think it's going to be rarer for two intuitives to marry. I think there'll be sometimes when two intellectuals marry because they're professionals and the circles they go around in. But most couples I come across, one of the partners is intuitive and one is logical. And I see that as complementary. The first girlfriend I had that married the other guy, one of her comments was she didn't want to marry me because we're too much alike. And so she said, well, if we got married, our strengths would reinforce our strengths, but our weaknesses would reinforce the weaknesses. And there's a measure of truth to that.
As a non-Christian, you use your prejudices to choose and whatever.
As a Christian, I still do that.
But is it biblically justified? I mean, you're judging, aren't you? You're really. I know you don't just go out and marry someone because you know how to judge others. Come on, you know what I'm asking.
I know exactly what you're asking, but hey, let's put it this way. Advertising understands, Phil, that you're more likely to talk to a nice-looking female than an otherwise
So you've judged anyway.
a 400-pound, 3-foot-tall, defigured woman.
But does that mean that she's not entitled to get married?
No, but that's the problem. Is you're more likely, even as a Christian.
But is that right?
Well, no, it's not right. It's not. Of course, it's Phil. Of course, it's not right. But the problem is, how pure are all of our hearts? You're going to get him a blind date now, are you? Serena. Well, we might look a little bit at that next week when we talk about marriage counseling. Although actually the fourth session of this unit is on divorce and remarrying. So it's best if we keep it to there or we won't finish tonight. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about the enrich and prepare and then I'll pass it around. I don't really want to advertise this. I mean, that's not what tonight's about. I don't use it for every pre-marriage couple. In fact, I only might use it 1 out of 4. Because a lot of the couples that come to me, they say, Daniel, you're a marriage counselor, and we really want to know what the pitfalls are from a marriage counselor's point of view before we get married. So I give that to them. And they don't really want an exhaustive survey like this, because they say, "Oh, look, we've talked to, we're pretty honest, and we've got really good communication skills, and I trust that some of them do. There are some people out there. So if I think they do, after I've talked with them for a session, then I just say, well, what would you like? And they say, well, we don't want to do the survey, so I don't force it. But those that do want to take the survey, it is interesting. I think it does put more stress on the couple, because some things do get revealed, which they then have to talk through. Well, they don't have to, but they should. Now, prepare comes in two forms, well, a couple of different forms, but the two major ones are prepare, which is the pre-marriage one, and then enrich, which is this one here, this sample I'll hand around to you, because of course they're confidential, but this is an example. And enrich just has an extra question in it that the prepare doesn't, although the analysis is slightly different. So I'll hand that around. You can have a poke at it, have a look at it. It's pretty exhaustive. The major things that this does is it works out where the couple's goalposts are. It works out, so compared to each other, what sort of unity they have in each of these things. It works out where in fact, how about I wait, because I actually talk about some of the stuff in here. So I'll just keep this for the moment, because that's actually where we're going on to, is some of the different subject areas in this survey. Okay, well, let's go on. F, what areas do we match or contrast? What areas do we match or contrast? In order to overcome our blinkers, it's helpful to complete a pre-marriage survey such as Prepare. In the survey, the couples asked 165 questions relating to personal and couple development. The analysis of the survey then exposes 7 different analyses of 12 different categories. Of course, the survey does not pretend to predict the success or failure of a marriage. It just helps to make sure many relevant areas have been discussed and not avoided. Often good communication skills can overcome many differences, like we talked about marrying within your own village. Number 1, basic aspects of the Prepare survey. So these are just some of the things that the survey covers. A comparison of background information on each individual. I'll just flip this over while I'm showing it to you. So that's what it looks like, background information. Current living arrangement with partner, male or female, marital status, married before. This is enriched, so married at the moment. Parents' marital status, is the woman pregnant, birth position in your family, number of children in your family, and so on and so forth. And it's interesting just to compare their answers. Like, how many children do you want? And the male and the female answer that, and it's interesting to see whether they line up. Pre-marriage, most of the time they do. In marriage, surprisingly, many don't. Okay, the second thing is, how do their personalities compare? So there's a little personality assessment, and this is how it sounds. The male is very good at expressing his thoughts and feelings and is very able to ask for what he wants from his partner. So that's assertive. The female has difficulty expressing her thoughts and feelings and is seldom able to ask for what she wants from her partner. So that's the sort of thing that the personality looks at.
To get the couples in together up and share the answers?
Absolutely. I don't give it to them because the way the survey is done is it has to be adjusted and the raw scores have to be modified. So this is copyrighted material. They're not allowed to have it. Then we go on. How do the goalposts of each person compare with their partner? Going backwards, backing up a bit. B, how do the personalities compare in assertiveness, which I just mentioned, self-confidence, avoidance, and partner dominance? C, what sort of couple type dynamics do the pair exhibit? And here's a little chart of different couple types. There's devitalized, discouraged in other words, conflicted, a lot of arguments, traditional, read that as Christian, harmonious, read that as non-Christian successful, and vitalize, which is what they say is the best. This is a non-Christian survey. I mean, it came out of the Anglican Church, I think, originally, but it's been watered down like lots of things to apply to anybody. How do the goalposts of each person compare with their partners? And these are the sort of goalposts here. Number of positive couple agreements. How many times they were indecisive, that is, one said one thing, the other said the other. How many times they disagreed, and then how many are special issue, which I'll talk about in just a minute. And then on all these 12 different categories, which I'll read out in just a minute, whether they've, like 20%, 50%, 40%, 50% would be smack in the middle of agreement or disagreement. 100% as if the goalposts are together. 0% as if the goalposts are totally apart. And this couple doesn't have any zeros, but I've had some couples that have had 3 or 4 zeros. That's pretty heavy going for an engaged couple to have 4 zeros. That is, the goalposts are totally opposite of each other. E, how do the individual responses compare with the answers the psychologist would expect? They're marked on here as S, or special consideration, to be discussed. You know, the psychologist thought they would answer in the affirmative, and the couple both answered in the negative. F, how does the individual compare with all the other same gender people that have completed the survey? That really isn't of much good, because really it just says what is the average, what's the norm, compared to all the others that have ever taken this. Well, that is not the population in general, is it? Especially since this is mainly used through churches, even though it's secular. G, in terms of closeness and flexibility, how does their relationship compare to their parents? And these particular psychologists think that's very important, so they chart it like this, where that is flexibility, that axis, how flexible the individuals are, compared to closeness. So, for argument's sake, I could come from a family that was overly flexible, meaning that everybody did their own thing, basically. You never had common tea. You know, people would get home and they'd grab a bite out of the fridge, or even have their own section of the fridge. Overly flexible to inflexible. You know, no one did anything unless the family was consulted first. Or you know, the roles are very tightly dictated. And then we've got closeness, where we can be overly connected, like enmeshed. That's probably more the where the family is being consulted, compared to distancing, where everybody does their own thing. And the flexibility talks more about roles. So we can graph that on those two axes. In this example here, the female is right in the middle from her family of origin, which would be very healthy. But if you get them on these outside edges, then that's quite extreme. And it just gives you some indication of where their family was, where they're at now. Have they shifted significantly from their parental background? And that's right. And of course, if as a pre-marriage thing they've shifted a great deal from their parents' position, what is the possibility? That over time they'll drift back to where their parents' position was. Okay. Well, that's one of the things that they really need to explore with a counselor, to see why have they changed. Have they changed because they're trying to woo their partner, and as soon as they get married, the chase is over, and then they can just relax and cruise, which means they'll do basically the same as their parents did. Okay, number 2, categories of the Prepare Relationship Survey. Now, these are the different categories, basically, that we want to know how close the goalposts are, or how far apart. And because it's just interesting to see how a thorough survey would be, I put that in here. Idealistic distortion. The very first thing the survey does is it works out how much are they looking through rose-colored glasses at marriage. How realistic are they about the challenges of marriage? And what would you expect between the married couples and the pre-married couples? The pre-married couples are going to have lots of rose, aren't they? And the married couples are going to be pretty cynical. So that's one difference between prepare and enrich. Now, once they worked out what your idealistic distortion is, they take the individual scores and then they modify them. And that's one reason why we can't just give these things out. So the counselor goes through and we explore where the obvious tricky bits are. I mean, because you could discuss this for months. But basically, if there's not a whole lot to discuss, about 2 sessions, counseling, working through the survey, 2 or 3. If there's lots to discuss, you might get up to, say, 5 of that. Now, the next considerations are their marriage expectations. How do the partners compare? Personality issues. Catch how this is worded. How well does the individual appreciate the personality, behavior, or habits of their partner? Got one lady the other day was really upset because her husband spits. She hates it. Communication. How well do they share their feelings and understand each other? Conflict resolution. How well do they discuss and resolve differences? Financial management. Leisure activities. Are they satisfied with the quality and amount of leisure time spent separately and together? Now, normally you wouldn't think that's important, particularly, but it's very important. Now, that's something that most counselors would not normally cover, is looking at the couple's leisure activities. But actually it's pretty significant. Sexual expectations, children and parenting, family and friends, role relationships. How much do they want an egalitarian relationship? This is where this survey labels Christians as traditional. I think quite unfairly. Spiritual beliefs, couple closeness. Then we go on to the closeness, family closeness, couple flexibility, family flexibility, like I showed you on that chart. Okay, I'll send it around, and you can have a browse at it. Like I said, this isn't a real one anyhow. But it'll give you some idea of what it's all about, what it looks like. Development tasks for successful marriages. Let's go on to G. Development tasks. These are some of the following development tasks are necessary adjustments for any healthy marriage. Now, 1, a newly formed relationship needs to establish social networks as married people, don't they? Is that going to be the same as their social networks as individuals? As singles? Of course not. They're going to gain some friends and they're going to lose others. Number 2, to adapt, adjust, and become comfortable as partners. 3, dealing with torn loyalties, such as former boys and girlfriends. Working through in spiritual terms, working through soul ties. 4, breaking the grip of parents and childhood patterns. 5, to accept and adjust to personality, lifestyle, values, food issues, female-male differences. 6, to establish decision-making patterns, adjusting power balances, sorting out who controls what, boundaries and levels of dominance. 7, to develop patterns for handling conflicts, emotional hurts. 8, to set up the house, negotiate roles, home duties, and other domestic arrangements. 9, examine expectations and use of resources such as money. 10, work out mutual levels of intimacy, closeness, and trust. 11, establish boundaries on sex, affection, and touch, which we talked a little bit about earlier. There's a fair amount there, isn't there? Society's got the idea, well, you find the right person, maybe the right person, because you can always throw them away later, just like getting the new video. You shack with them for a while, see how well it works out, and hey, relationships, they just sort of happen. That's the mentality out there. And you've just looked at the developmental tasks here of a new relationship. A lot going on. And we've got one fairly newly married couple here. Some adjustments there, ain't there? Yep. And those are some of the developmental tasks you guys have had to face. Rearranging friendships between the singles and the couples now. What do you do if all your girlfriends were single and, because there's some things that are coupleness types events and other types that are quite normally single type events. And all the negotiations there. Yep. Okay, let's go on to H. Biblical principles of pre-marriage. Let's look at some biblical principles of pre-marriage. Some of these you'll have known as sort of marriage principles, but they're actually pre-marriage principles. Start out of Genesis 2, verse 15 to 24. Marriage is not the cultural invention of mankind. God has a plan for the human race, and marriage is part of that. There is a process by which human beings choose their mates, and if we have time, I'll go through that appendix with you. And God initiated some of those principles. Number 1, Adam was given authority in the earth. Adam was given authority. Adam was placed into the garden and given a job to do. Adam did not volunteer. God put him where he wanted him. We will see how well Adam followed God's commands in the session on God's design for marriage next week. Number 2, it's not good for anyone to be alone. So you fill in there's alone. God wanted Eve to be Adam's companion, someone who could keep him company, but also someone to help Adam administer the garden. I messed up that's my copy, never mind. I messed up the photocopier here. Number 3, the woman is a reflection of the man's heart. The woman is a reflection of the man's heart. Eve was taken out of the side of Adam, not from his head to lord it over Adam, or from his foot so Adam could stomp on her, but from his rib where his heart is. Eve was and is supposed to be connected to Adam's heart and make Adam's decisions successful. I think one of the principal things that wives need to learn is how to make their husband's decisions successful. Not how to make the decisions for him, not how to con him into doing it her way, but how to make his decisions successful. Number 4, God brings the woman to the man. God brings the woman to the man. God brought Eve to Adam, not the other way around. The woman is supposed to join the male on his journey of life, not the other way around. Most females will gladly follow a godly man who knows who he is and where he's going. Number 5, leave parents and cleave to partner. Both man and female need to leave their parents and cling to each other. God wants us to reproduce households as well as children. We are to come out from the domination and advice of our parents and start our own nuclear family. It's impossible for the couple to develop properly if their parents are overshadowing them and not allowing them to make their own mistakes. In some practical ways, couples need to launch out on their own. They may need to live somewhere else besides in their parents' home. They must make their own decisions even though they may solicit a parent's advice. And it's amazing how many couples haven't done this. Yes?
My mother-in-law expected to myself to find her when we got to our home visitation together. We were okay and all that sort of thing, and she was like ripped on him, and we did prepare, and he really didn't know who he was. He wasn't separate to his parents. Now he knows who he is, and I said to her, Tim, this can't happen. So we were organised that we wouldn't tell anyone we were going to our honeymoon, no one at all.
Yes.
And she couldn't understand it. She still can't understand it to this day. And she phoned my mum and said, "You know who they are, don't you?" And like she was really, his dad came around to the idea, but she still can't understand
Yeah, that's it. Painful, but that's the sort of breaks that kids need to do. And if the children don't do it, and the parents don't have enough sense, then things go really wrong. I mean, even the birds got enough sense out there to kick the fledglings out. So if your parents didn't kick you guys out, then you need to say, well, I'm prepared to fly now, and see you around. Yeah, that's thanks for sharing.
Do breaking of soul ties with this, because you do post-marriage counselling as well as with this.
I think they're sometimes valid to actually take the time to break soul ties with parents.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You do that.
I would. I wouldn't automatically do it. It's just if I sensed there was a problem.
So it's not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I mean, a lot of this stuff is you have to sort of sense where is the import. How important is one thing compared to another. Counseling is always a juggling act. I mean,
Breaking of soul ties was a must at all times. No. Okay.
well, I mean, we do a lot of stuff automatically. I mean, as I change my attitudes, I break soul ties. In the counseling, I mean, look, I could make a list on some people and say, this is everything that's wrong with them. You ought to be in therapy until you get it all sorted out. Well, I mean, they'll be there for 10 years. We're not after perfectionism. And we'll look at the Appendix B on comparison of marriage styles in a minute. Helping the couple sort through issues, finding Jesus' perspective on their marriage, working through their own blind spots, learning to become one unit, and that would certainly give them a head start if they did that. So I do, I do push the idea of premarital counseling is pretty important. I think there's nothing more vital than a foundation, a good foundation for marriage. There's more than one source there. That was the major source of that. The developmental tasks came out of that one book, and then there's a couple of footnotes there to some of the things we discussed. And that's the Prepare one, number 2, Olson, Fournier, and Druckmann. Let's look at the appendices, people. There's a couple of really interesting appendices here. Let's look at pair bonding on Appendix A on page 9. Desmond Morse, an anthropologist, has written a couple of secular books. And you might remember The Naked Ape was one of them. And this one, and he wrote one on pair bonding. And so this is a sort of a combination of Desmond Morse's perspective of all the different cultures around the world. How do men and women come together physically in marriage? And superimposed on that is a Christian perspective out of Genesis. Okay? Now, I took these were Tabor notes. I forget who my lecturer was, but in '92 when I did this, I wrote this down. I didn't get all of it, but most of it. What's the process that bonds one person to another of the opposite sex? The progression is something like this in all cultures. We're talking about physically here now. Number 1, leaving no physical contact. This is the first section. The first thing that happens is my eye looks at somebody else's body. We discover the other person. There's some sort of connection. We go, wow. Now, Desmond says this happens in every culture, cross-cultural. Second thing is we have an eye-to-eye contact. Is the spark returned? Then we have voice-to-voice, communication, exploration of the other. Now that's called, he calls that, the Christian lecturer called that leaving. Leaving your parents, starting to get connected to another person. Number 2 is cleaving. That is the first touch, hand to hand, which is a social statement that we belong together. Then we have an arm to shoulder, ownership, the friendship's going somewhere. That was terrifying to me as a teenage boy, to get to the point where I might put my arm around a girl because that's where she was either going to go like that or she was going to cooperate. Either she was going to make a social statement that it was okay for me to hang around, or it was blow it out your ear, Jack. You know? And the rejection was huge. You think, you ladies don't know how many knees got shaken up knees knocking when we tried to put our arm around you. I just about died. Maybe you almost died too, but anyways. Then we go on to arm to waist. And that's a more intimate gesture by men to females. Arm around the shoulder is less intimate than arm around the waist. And if the lady lets you do it, then she says there's enough shared in that relationship for serious decisions on the future. Now, people come to me and they say, couples go on steady. They say, how much physical contact should we have? Now, it's interesting. This is the last exit point. At that point is the last exit point for a relationship to end without there being any hurt. If all you ever did is let your boyfriend put his arm around your waist, if you busted it up there, everybody would go away relatively happy. You wouldn't be shattered. But as we go on in more physical intimacy, more connection takes place, which means more pain when the split comes. Number 3, cleaving. Intimate contact. Face-to-face. Intimate kissing. Exchange of bacteria. How about that for an anthropologist? That really tickled my fancy, so I wrote that one down. Hand to head. Stroking hair, showing we're vulnerable. So even more intimate than an arm around the waist, as if a female would let the guy stroke her hair, or vice versa. Hand to body, an acceptance of their imperfections, giving a massage or something. Then we go on to one flesh, naked and unashamed. Mouth to breast. I was writing so furiously I never got that one. Maybe it's just as well. Hand to genital is the next step. And finally, genital to genital, consummation of one flesh. Okay, so that's the physical progression. And I say to dating couples, from a Christian point of view, I reckon you ought to stop at the beginning of 3, which seems pretty prudish in today's society. But really, if we're talking about preventing hurt, that's as far as it ought to go without a serious commitment. And there's some churches out there that enforce this very rigorously. Let's look at another condition. Another aspect is called rebonding, the becoming on one flesh again. In bonding, the steps were virgin, leaving, cleaving, one flesh. But what if someone's had a prior relationship? They would try to skip steps in their new relationship and attempt to go forward from wherever they left off. If I had sex last night with a girlfriend, and I meet a new female today, am I going to want to go through eye to body, eye to eye, voice to voice, hand to hand, hand to shoulder, hand to waist? All in one motion. That's it. I'm going to want to skip right to step 4C. That's the problem here. That's why God says don't do it with more than one person. Back to your notes. They'll try to skip steps in a new relationship, attempt to go forward from wherever they left off. If someone has had sex already, they need time to get back to virgin status, i.e. 0, and that takes time. Probably about 2 years. If you skip any bond or prematurely jump ahead, you will either go into fornication, promiscuity, or adultery. And then, of course, then begs the question, can Christians remarry? I won't touch that one. We'll do that in 2 weeks' time. Let's go to the other one, which those of you that are in marriage situation will be quite an interesting little homework for you to do this. This is basically 3 marriage styles, and each column is which one it is. So this first column is traditional, second one is biblical, third one is modern. So this particular article is saying that traditional and biblical are quite different. Now, there's 4 big categories that have 3 little categories in each one. So commitment in a traditional marriage is commitment to the institution. It's coercive. That is, the commitment is coercive. You will stay married or else. And you get dutiful sex for male pleasure in a traditional marriage. Okay, that's under commitment. Commitment under biblical is a covenant, and a covenant is where the stronger party endeavors to look after the weaker party no matter what. God's covenant with us is that we could give him nothing and he gave us everything. That's a covenant. It's cohesive. That is, there's a bonding together. And you have affectionate sex for mutual pleasure. That's a biblical marriage. Now, modern marriage, which is what we're getting more and more these days, is it's a contract. You know, if you give me sex 3 times a week, I'll give you money for your apartment. It's disengaged. 2 single people in a married condition. And self-centered sex, that is what we're after, is getting my cut of the orgasms in the sex. Get the idea? Now, an interesting, by the way, if you're game, those of you that are in relationship, if you're game, work out with your partner what you've got on this sheet, because you won't have everything under biblical, and then see if you're willing to do it God's way. Have a go. Okay, well, let me pray for you. And those of you that can stay and help out to put the chairs and tables away, that'd be great. Lord Jesus, people are here tonight because they're interested in a relationship. They want better relationships for themselves. They want better relationships for the people they love. They want better relationships in the body of Christ. And Father, the good news is that you're interested in all this and that you want them to. And so, Father, we just ask that you'd help us all to have ears to hear your point of view on relationship. And that those young couples around us that are interested in getting married, that we would be able to contribute to the health of their relationship by putting some input into them. And so, Father, we just touched on only a few things tonight. Help expand our ideas and our awareness of what is important in order to have a foundation in a relationship, such as marriage. A lot of these principles apply for girl and boyfriends or even for just friends. And so, Father, teach us more how to be more like Jesus and how to have more of a relationship like Jesus has with you. And so, Father, we just commend this group here. Protect them. Every family that's represented, just be with them and bless them. In Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for coming. Next week is Principles of Marriage. And I'm not sure whether we're up at the green room. Hang on. We just decided that's Wednesday night. So I got to find whether... We'll try the green room. I'll have to work it out with Walter. But you'll have signs around the place if it's not up in the green room. So it's Wednesday at the green room. I'll try to remember that if you try to remember it.